I learned my lessons about money from an unlikely source. Not business school here at Berkeley or at Stanford where I went, sorry about that, but, but from people I used to call poor. And I actually did call them poor, most people do. But when you actually work hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder with people that I used to call poor, you realize there's nothing poor about them. And to call them poor is to demean them and ourselves, because what's poor is their circumstances, not them. In fact, those circumstances provide a kind of environment that makes them strong, resilient, innovative. In fact, they exhibit more courage to live through a day than you and I are going to need in our entire lifetime. It's inappropriate to call these people poor. That's their circumstances, but not them. They're whole and complete and actually totally awesome. I also learned a lot of lessons from people I used to call rich, and we make the same mistake when we label those people by their financial circumstances, although they look glamorous and what everybody seems to want. But when you work side by side, as I have, with people that I used to call rich, there's a suffering there too. There's a misunderstanding about who they are. People relate to them in a weird way, and they relate to themselves in a weird way. They're whole and complete people living in the ebb and flow and sometimes tyranny of excess resources, which can be completely confusing. We live in a culture around money that's sick, that makes us a little sick, where there's suffering everywhere, from the people living in abject poverty to people living in massive wealth, and a lot of us in between, because that culture actually is based in a whole lot of lies, promises that never get fulfilled, and a misunderstanding of the world, in my view. I learned some very, very special lessons on one day in my life, many, 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 many years ago, before most of you here were born, when I was a young fundraiser for the Hunger Project. And at the Hunger Project office, the work of ending world hunger, we got a call from a huge food company. Actually, at that time, it was the largest food company in the United States, and I think the world. And they'd had a scandal. They'd been caught red-handed doing something that was actually illegal, and shamed the company, and they were embarrassed and humiliated, and they were scrambling because their stock was plummeting, and they had this terrible image. And we got a call from that company saying they wanted to give a contribution to ending world hunger. A little suspicious, but I was dispatched to this Midwestern city. I went to what was called a breakfast meeting with the CEO of the largest food company in the world in this gigantic building. I went all the way to the top of this gigantic building in the Midwest, and in this man's office, first of all, he sat behind, I think, the biggest desk I've ever seen in my life. It was huge. And behind him were floor-to-ceiling windows. And this was an early morning meeting. I thought it was a breakfast meeting, but it was just named breakfast because it was early. It was 7:30. And I sat on this side of the table, and he sat with his back to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the sun was rising behind him. And I know everybody's been in this situation. I could not see this guy. He was backlit. I look at this man, very, very important man, but I never saw his eyes. And I'm sitting there on this side of the table. He could see everything about me. And I had 15 minutes to talk about ending world hunger, so I needed to get right on with it. So I did the best I could to inspire him and, say something really moving. And I got into it. I was totally into it. And then I looked at my watch. I had my 15 minutes, and I'd already talked for 8 minutes. I thought, God, he's got to say something here. So I was quiet. And then he didn't, as far as I know, he didn't say anything. He opened the drawer on his side of the desk, pulled out a yellow, already filled out computer check made out to the Hunger Project for $50,000. Now, I was a young fundraiser. This is years and years ago. That would have been the biggest contribution I'd ever raised. But something else was happening there. And when he picked up that check out of the drawer and he pushed it from his side of the desk, this giant desk, over to my side of the desk. As it came over my side of the desk, I felt the guilt and shame and wrongdoing and out integrity of the company coming with that money, like a dump. I picked up the check. I had the presence of mind to do that. I thanked him. I had the presence of mind to thank him. Then he stood up, and I don't remember if he even said a word. I don't even know. And this kind of cardboard cutout of a guy reached toward me with his hand and said thank you, as if I was dismissed. I put the check in my briefcase, and I walked out of there, and I felt sick to my stomach. I felt dirty. I felt used. I felt yucky. I went down to the street level. The building was really high, so I started to get nauseous going down. Thought it was the elevator, but actually it was this check. And I took a taxi to the airport. I was due in New York that night. This is early in the morning, due in New York that night at 6:37 p.m. for a fundraising event at my friend Peter's Harlem church. We were going to convene in the church basement. He wanted me to raise money from his wonderful friends in Harlem and the African American church there. So I had plenty of time to get there, but I got caught in a Midwestern storm and landed in Tulsa, and then we took off and landed in St. Louis, et cetera. We finally get to New York hours and hours and hours and hours later. This is way back before cell phones and internet. I was already late when I landed in LaGuardia. It's raining cats and dogs. The storm is in New York, too. I rush to the church in Harlem, not really clear where I was going, just frantic, you know how you are when you're late. I get there 2 hours late to this meeting in the church basement. I had no way of telling them I was going to be late. I run down the steps of the church basement. Okay, it's raining outside like crazy. There's buckets all around the church basement for leaks. There's a cement floor painted gray, and 75 people in folding chairs sitting there waiting for their speaker, me. My friend Peter is telling jokes or, I don't know, lighting his hair on fire, doing something to keep them there. And finally he sees me, he says, Lynne's here. And I run up the aisle, apologize. I turn around and look at these people, and it was that kind of fluorescent lighting that sometimes is in a basement church. And I turned around and I saw these people, and I could see every face, not just one or two, all 75 people. Beautiful, extraordinarily attentive, somehow awesome African-American people. I was the only white person in the room. And I got moved like I am now. And I started to talk about the work we were doing in Africa. And I got really into it. And they hung on every word. I could actually see them. That was very helpful. And then it was time to ask for the money. If you're a fundraiser, if you've ever fundraised, there's that moment, and the moment came. And so I did like a really, really good ask, and you could hear a pin drop. And there was plop, plop, plop in the buckets and the rain outside, and then a woman stood up, an elegant, African-American, slender woman. I'd say she was in her 70s. She had gray hair parted in the middle and a tidy bun at the back of her neck, and she had on a maid's uniform, formal, old-fashioned maid's uniform, and a raincoat on, and a purse on her arm. And she was tall and slender, and she stood up and she said, "My name is Gertrude, and I like you," she said. "Oh, good. And I like what you said. And I want you to know something," she said. "Money is just like water. It flows through every life. It doesn't belong to any of us. It belongs to all of us, or none of us. Some people have a rushing river flowing through their life. Some of us, just a little trickle, like me. I don't have a bank account. I don't have a checkbook," she said. "I don't have credit cards, but I have money. And I earned it from doing some people's wash. That's how I earn it, and I'm proud of that. And I have money in my purse, and I want to give it to you. And I want you to know that this money that's like water is a carrier. That's why we call it a currency. It's a current. And as it flows through my life, I know it's my job to pass it on where it'll do the most good for the most folks. So I'm going to give my $50 in my purse to you. And she walked up the aisle of that church basement, and by this point I was crying. I think she was crying, I can't really remember. And she gave me her $50 in tens and fives and ones and some change, and she gave me a big hug. And then every single person in that church basement stood behind her, and one by one, they gave me their $16.75, $72.03, $10, $6. And I didn't have a basket, so I put it in my briefcase, at the bottom of which was the yellow computer check for $50,000 face down. And by the end of that extraordinary experience, we were singing, we were crying, it was awesome. And I went back to my hotel, and I put the $50,000 check on my bed, and the $637.33, which was the total of the amount of money that was given to me in cash in the church basement. And I saw this money, this $633.37 is a carrier of love, commitment, courage. This is going to do more for ending hunger than that $50,000. So I sat down, wrote a letter to the CEO, and I sent the money back. Now, that would be the end of the story, but there's a really awesome PS, and that's this. 3 years later in my office in San Francisco, I got a handwritten letter from that CEO. And that letter said, "I'll never forget the return of that $50,000. It really rocked my world." And the letter that you wrote saying, when the company's committed to ending world hunger and this money carries their commitment, we'd love to accept the money. But right now, we choose to send it back. That's what my letter had said. And he said, I left the company after that year, got my retirement package, a lot of money, and I started paying attention to ending world hunger for the first time. I was head of a food company. It didn't occur to me until I retired to pay attention to ending world hunger. I've followed the progress of the Hunger Project, and I've been deeply impressed, deeply moved, and I want to know if you would now accept, with all my heart, my personal check that comes from my commitment, my engagement, my intentionality, my participation in ending world hunger for $250,000. And I did. So what I want to tell you is I have learned, as Gertrude told me so beautifully, that money is like water. When it flows, it purifies, it cleanses, it makes things grow, it makes things green. When it's held and hoarded, just like water, it is toxic, stagnant. It actually makes you sick. We need to move it. It comes through our lives in a way that allows us to pass it on to do the most good for the most folks. And if you recognize that you are enough, that you have enough, that the universe constantly meets you and gives you exactly what you want, rather than living in the mindset, the crazy, unconscious mindset of scarcity, chasing more all the time. If you let go of trying to get more of what you don't really need, which is mostly what we're brainwashed to want more of, you can use all that energy that's tied up in the chase and turn to make a difference with what you already have. Not just money, but everything. When you make a difference with what you already have, when you own it, when you nourish it, when you make a difference with it, when you share it, it expands. Let me say that again. This is the principle of sufficiency. If you let go of trying to get more of what you don't really need, it frees up all that energy tied up in the chase to turn and pay attention to what you have. when you pay attention to what you have, when you nourish it, when you make a difference with it, when you share it, it expands. What you appreciate appreciates. Thank you.